At 3 a.m. I overheard my daughter-in-law on the phone and she said, "The meds are making her confused. Tomorrow I'll get her committed. Then I just need to get rid of my husband and all that money is ours." My blood ran cold, but I knew exactly what to do. Let's just say she got a big surprise during her morning shower. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, and a monument to my son's success. It was also, I was beginning to realize, a gilded cage. From the outside, the sprawling single-story home in the exclusive Houston suburb of Piney Point Village was a vision of glass steel and clean white lines. Nestled amongst towering pine trees that offered a formidable illusion of privacy, inside it was a silent, climate-controlled world of gleaming marble floors, minimalist furniture, and automated blinds that whispered up and down at the command of a disembodied voice. It was the kind of house featured in magazines, a place designed to be looked at more than lived in, and for the past 3 weeks, it had been my home, my hospital, and I feared my prison. My name is Esther Jones, but the only people who ever called me that were suspects or lawyers. To everyone else, I was Essie. For 35 years I was a detective with the Chicago PD, rising through the ranks to robbery homicide. My life was a gritty landscape of interrogation rooms, crime scenes, and the relentless pursuit of facts. I was good at my job. I could read a lie in the flicker of an eyelid, spot an inconsistency in a witness statement from a mile away. My mind was my weapon, a finely tuned instrument of observation and deduction. But at 67, after a minor heart scare that my son Robert had treated like a 5-alarm fire, I was now officially retired and recovering. And in this house, my finely tuned mind was being told, with the most loving and gentle of intentions, that it was beginning to fail. The official story was that I was here for my health. Robert and his beautiful doting wife Chantel had insisted. "You can't be alone right now, Mom," Robert had said, his face a mask of earnest concern as they packed my bags in my quiet Chicago condo. "Chantel and I will take care of everything. The Houston air will do you good." Chantel. Chantel had been the perfect angel of mercy. She had arranged my flight, set up a beautiful guest suite for me overlooking the pool, and had taken over my entire wellness regimen with the efficiency of a field marshal. She was stunningly beautiful, an art gallery owner with impeccable taste and a voice as smooth and sweet as honey. She floated through her perfect house like a goddess, her every movement graceful, her every word a soft melody of care. She was, by all accounts, the perfect wife to my son and the perfect daughter-in-law to me. And that was the problem. In my line of work I learned one thing very quickly: nothing is ever perfect. The real problem, the one that gnawed at me in the quiet, sleepless hours of the night, wasn't just my own health, it was Robert. My son, my brilliant, kind-hearted son, was not himself. At 41 he was a giant in the architectural world, a man whose mind could conjure magnificent buildings from thin air. But here in his own home he was foggy. He'd misplace his keys, only to have Chantel find them in his hand. He'd lose his train of thought mid-sentence, and Chantel would finish it for him with a sad, knowing smile. He seemed perpetually tired, his movements slow, his usual sharp wit dulled to a soft, compliant passivity. "It's the stress," Chantel would explain, her hand resting lovingly on his shoulder. "He's been working so hard. The doctor gave him some new vitamins, a natural blend to help him manage the anxiety." She administered these vitamins herself, along with a special herbal tea she brewed for him every evening, a fragrant concoction she claimed had calming properties. She treated him like a fragile, precious object, and he, in his medicated haze, seemed to accept her diagnosis of his own fragility. This loving concern was a suffocating blanket, and it extended to me as well. My own recent bouts of forgetfulness and disorientation, which had begun shortly after I arrived and started drinking the special calming tea she prepared for me each night, were met with the same pitying smiles. Whenever I would try to voice my concerns, to point out that this was more than just stress, that something felt wrong with both of us, the response was always the same: "Mom, I think you're forgetting what Dr. Miller said about your own memory after the health scare," Robert would say, his voice gentle but firm, repeating lines that sounded suspiciously like they had been rehearsed. "Chantel is taking care of us. She's an angel. Please don't undermine her. It just adds to my stress." I was being gaslit, my own professional instincts and maternal concerns being dismissed as the confused ramblings of an aging woman. I was a guest in their home, a patient in their care, and my opinions were symptoms of my own decline. I was trapped, Not by locked doors but by the soft, impenetrable walls of their loving concern. The house, with its smart technology and silent watching cameras, felt less like a home and more like a high-tech asylum, and I was beginning to suspect I wasn't the only inmate. The night I learned the truth was a Tuesday. A storm had rolled in from the Gulf, and the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my guest suite. Sleep, as usual, was a fickle visitor. At 3 a.m. I gave up, my mind a restless hive of anxieties. The tea Chantal had given me before bed was supposed to help me sleep, but instead, it just made my thoughts feel thick and syrupy, my mind a car stuck in mud. I slipped out of bed, my old detective's habit of moving silently serving me well. I thought a glass of water might help settle the unease in my gut. The house was dark, the only light a pale digital glow from the various smart hubs and control panels embedded in the walls. As I padded down the long marble-floored hallway, I noticed a sliver of light from under the door of the den at the far end of the house. I could hear a voice, a hushed, urgent whisper. It was Chantal. My first thought was that she was on a late-night call for her gallery, perhaps dealing with an international client, but something in her tone, a cold clinical precision I had never heard before, made me pause. Curiosity, the old insistent instinct of my profession, took over. I crept closer, my bare feet making no sound on the cold stone. I pressed my ear to the heavy soundproofed door. Her words were crisp and clear, stripped of all their usual sweetness. They were the words of a different woman entirely. No, Julian, the dosage is perfect. I've been gradually increasing it for both of them. The meds are making her confused, just like the specialist said they would. She barely questioned it when I told her she'd forgotten her doctor's appointment last week, an appointment that never existed. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me, and a specialist, who was Julian. A low male voice murmured on the other end of the line, too faint for me to make out the words. Chantal laughed, a sharp, ugly sound, utterly devoid of humor. Don't worry about your cut. It's all going according to plan. I've been prepping Robert's partners for months, telling them how worried I am about his mental state, his breakdowns from the stress of taking care of his ailing mother. I've got the committal paperwork for Essie already. Tomorrow I'll get her committed. The doctors at the facility will see exactly what I've told them to see. A paranoid old woman who has tragically lost her mind. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from crying out. Committed. She was talking about me. She was intentionally drugging me to make me appear senile. Then came the final, devastating blow. Her voice dropped to an icy conspiratorial whisper, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. And once his mother is securely tucked away and legally discredited, then I just need to get rid of my husband, and all that money is ours. A tragic accident, a grieving widow who just lost her mother-in-law and her husband in the same month. No one will ever suspect a thing. I recoiled from the door as if I had been burned. I stumbled back into the darkness of the hallway, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle the scream that was clawing its way up my throat. The world seemed to tilt and spin, the polished marble floor threatening to rise up and swallow me. This wasn't just a simple case of a greedy wife. This was a premeditated, cold-blooded plot to steal my son's fortune, his sanity and ultimately his life, and I was the first pawn to be sacrificed. The gilded cage had just become a death trap. I made it back to my room on legs that felt like they were made of cotton. I didn't turn on the light. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my body trembling uncontrollably in the darkness. The clinical, evil words echoed in my mind. A relentless, torturous loop. Get her committed. Get rid of my husband. All that money is ours. For a long, terrifying moment, I was just a mother, a 67-year-old woman, trapped in the home of a sociopath, overwhelmed by a sense of helpless, suffocating terror. My son was in mortal danger. He was sleeping just down the hall, in a bed next to a woman who was methodically poisoning him, a woman who was planning his murder as calmly as she planned a dinner party. My first primal instinct was to run, to burst into his room, to shake him awake and scream the terrible truth. But then, through the fog of panic and the lingering effects of the drugs in my system, another part of me began to stir. It was a part of me that had been dormant for years, buried under the soft, comfortable blanket of retirement. It was the detective. Detective Essie Jones, Homicide Division, and she was not helpless. She was methodical. She was strategic. And she was royally pissed off. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. The trembling in my hands stopped. My breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, deepened into a slow, steady rhythm. I was no longer a victim, I was an investigator, and this house was my crime scene. I stood up and began to pace the length of my room, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. My mind, which had felt so foggy and sluggish for weeks, was suddenly brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. The meds weren't just for me, they were for Robert too. The shared symptoms, the mutual fogginess, it all snapped into focus. The realization was a jolt of pure adrenaline. Okay, Jones, I thought, my mind slipping back into the old familiar rhythms of a case assessment. What do we know? What do we need? What I knew. Chantal is actively drugging both me and my son Robert to induce symptoms of cognitive decline. She is working with an accomplice named Julian. She has fabricated a medical history for me to support her claims of my senility. She plans to have me involuntarily committed tomorrow. After I am removed and discredited, she plans to murder Robert and inherit his considerable fortune. Robert is already under her influence and will not believe any direct warning. What I needed: irrefutable proof. My word against hers was useless. She had spent weeks if not months, building a narrative of my senility and Robert's instability. Any accusation I made would be twisted and used as the final piece of evidence to prove I had lost my mind. I needed something a jury could see, something a lawyer couldn't spin. A way to neutralize the threat before she could act. The timeline was brutally short. I had until tomorrow. Sometime tomorrow a doctor or a team from a facility would arrive to take me away. Once I was in their system, my credibility would be zero. I would be a voice screaming from a padded room, and Robert's fate would be sealed. A way to get the evidence to the right people without her knowing. My cell phone was a liability. I had no doubt she monitored it. Any call to the police would be intercepted. I was cut off, isolated. I stopped pacing and stood in front of the window, looking out at the rain-slicked darkness. The house was an island, a high-tech fortress designed by my son. And in that moment, I realized the fortress itself was my only weapon. Robert had been so proud of his creation. It's the safest house in Houston, Mom, he had boasted when I first arrived. Everything is integrated. Security, climate, media. I can control the entire house from my phone. He could control it, which meant the master control system was here, in the house. If I could access it, I could turn Chantal's gilded cage into a digital trap. A plan began to form. A risky, audacious strategy born of desperation and a detective's instinct for psychological warfare. I couldn't outmuscle Chantal. I couldn't outrun her, but I could outthink her. She believed I was a confused old woman. That was her greatest mistake, and it was my greatest advantage. My plan would have two phases. Phase 1, evidence gathering. Phase 2, the trap. I knew from the overheard conversation that she was arrogant, that she believed her plan was flawless. That arrogance was the weakness I would exploit. I needed to rattle her, to shatter her perfect composure and force her into a confrontation. But on my terms, on my turf. The surprise during her morning shower was the key. It wasn't about revenge. It was a calculated move, a psychological trigger designed to provoke a specific reaction. I would use it to lure the predator out of her lair and into the open, right into the digital crosshairs of the trap I was about to set. I looked at the digital clock on my bedside table. 4:12 a.m. I had a few hours until dawn. A few hours to search for the evidence I needed, to weaponize my son's home against his would-be murderer, and to prepare for the most dangerous and important interrogation of my life. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. But now it was accompanied by something else. A grim, familiar determination. Detective Jones was back on the clock, and she had a monster to catch. The first rule of any investigation is to secure the scene. In this case, the primary scene was the master suite. Chantal and Robert's inner sanctum. My window of opportunity was narrow and precise. Chantal was a creature of habit. Every morning at 6 a.m., she went for what she called her yoga run, a 90-minute excursion that I now knew was likely a cover for a meeting with her accomplice, Julian. That 90-minute window was all I had. At 5:45 a.m. I was in the kitchen, dressed and pretending to be the slightly confused old woman they expected me to be. I was fumbling with the high-tech coffee maker when Chantal breezed in, already dressed in expensive athletic wear, her hair in a perfect ponytail. "Good morning, Essie," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "You're up early." "Oh, you know?" I mumbled, gesturing vaguely at the coffee machine. Couldn't quite figure out this newfangled thing. She smiled, that patient, pitying smile of hers. Don't worry, I'll make you a cup when I get back from my run. You just rest. She was out the door at 6:02 a.m. The moment I heard the whisper quiet hum of her Tesla pulling out of the driveway, I moved. The fumbling frail old woman vanished. I was on the clock. I went straight to the master suite. The room was immaculate, a minimalist landscape of gray, white and chrome. It was as cold and impersonal as a hotel room. Robert was still in bed. A deep, unnaturally heavy sleep. I felt a surge of maternal rage. He wasn't just sleeping, he was sedated. I resisted the urge to shake him awake, knowing it would be useless and would only alert him to my activities. I began my search. A professional search is not a frantic rummaging. It is a methodical, grid-based sweep. I started with Chantal's side of the room. The nightstand drawers contained nothing but expensive skin creams and a sleep mask. Her closet was a meticulously organized collection of designer clothes, the scent of her perfume hanging in the air. I patted down the pockets of her blazers and coats. Nothing. Time was ticking. My heart was pounding, a frantic beat against the silence of the house. I moved to her vanity. It was a sea of expensive cosmetics and jewelry boxes. I opened the largest one. It was filled with diamonds and gold, a glittering testament to my son's generosity. But I wasn't looking for jewels. I was looking for a lie. I ran my fingers along the velvet lining of the box, feeling for any inconsistency. And then I found it. A slight give in the bottom panel. A false bottom. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the edge. I finally got a nail under it, and lifted. And there it was. My first piece of hard evidence. It wasn't a bag of illicit drugs. It was something far more insidious. A standard pharmacy-issued prescription bottle. The label was pristine. The name on it was not Chantal's or Robert's. It was a name I didn't recognize. But the name of the drug made my blood run even colder than it had at 3 a.m. Olanzapine. I knew the drug from my old police cases. It was a powerful antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. But off-label, in small sustained doses, it had a different effect. It caused profound drowsiness, confusion, weight gain, and a flat, emotionless affect. It was a chemical straitjacket. It would, to any outside observer, perfectly mimic a severe depressive episode or the onset of dementia. This was her weapon. This was the tool she was using to dismantle my mind and my son's. I pulled out my burner phone, my hands shaking slightly. I took several clear high-resolution photographs of the bottle, making sure the name of the drug, the prescribing doctor, a Dr. Alistair Finch I had never heard of, and the patient's name were all crystal clear. Then I carefully placed the bottle back, closed the false bottom and arranged the jewelry exactly as I had found it. She would never know I had been there. The second phase of my plan was to weaponize the house itself. I went to Robert's office, a glass-walled room that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The master control for the smart home was a large, sleek touchscreen tablet mounted on the wall. I had watched Robert use it a dozen times, his fingers dancing across the screen. I powered it on, my mind racing. I navigated through the menus, my detective's brain deciphering the user interface, security, audio, visual, automation. It was all there. I found the settings for the integrated surveillance system. The cameras were mostly external, but the system had high-fidelity microphones and discrete cameras built into the smart hubs in every major room, including the kitchen and the master bedroom. They were voice-activated. I created a new custom automation routine, a sequence of commands that would be triggered by a specific unique voice command, a phrase that would sound perfectly natural in conversation, a phrase only I would know to use, a phrase that would activate the audio and video recording in the kitchen, save the file under a specific name, and crucially upload it to a secure cloud server, making it instantly accessible from anywhere and impossible for Chantal to delete from the local system. My secret command was a line from an old blues song my late husband used to sing, "The sun's gonna shine in my back door someday." It was a phrase of hope, a phrase of eventual justice, and it was now the trigger for my digital trap. I finished just as the clock on the tablet hit 7:25 a.m. I had 5 minutes to spare. I wiped down the tablet, removing any fingerprints, and slipped out of the office, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a grim, righteous satisfaction. The trap was set. All I had to do now was lure the predator into it. I needed to see my son. I needed to try one last time to break through the chemical fog that surrounded him. I found him in the living room sitting on the edge of the large white sofa, staring blankly at the dark television screen. He looked pale and lost, a stranger in his own home. "Robert, honey," I said, sitting down next to him, my voice gentle. He blinked, as if surfacing from a deep dive. "Hey Mom, that tea Chantal makes for you every night," I began, choosing my words carefully. "How does it make you feel, really?" A flicker of something, confusion, fear, crossed his face before it was quickly replaced by a dull defensive mask. "It's fine, Mom. It helps me sleep." "Does it?" I pressed, my voice still soft. "Or does it make it hard to think? Does it make you feel like your own mind is a foreign country?" He became agitated then, his hands fidgeting in his lap. He wouldn't look at me. He was reciting a script, a catechism of lies he had been forced to memorize. "Mom, Chantal is taking care of us. The doctor said my stress levels are high. He said I need to rest. Please don't undermine her. You're just making it worse." He stood up, a deep, weary sigh escaping his lips. I'm going to go lie down for a while. I have a headache." He shuffled out of the room, his shoulders slumped. It was a heartbreaking, terrifying confirmation. He was too far under her spell. He was unreachable. Any attempt to warn him would be filtered through the lens of his drugging and her manipulation, and he would only see me as the source of his agitation. I was on my own. My risky, desperate plan was the only chance he had. I had to see it through. The morning of the final day arrived with a sense of dreadful, inevitable finality. This was the day Chantal planned to have me committed. The day her endgame would be set in motion. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension. I woke before dawn, my nerves stretched as tight as piano wire, but my mind was a block of ice. I went through the motions of my morning, a silent, grim preparation for the battle to come. At 7 a.m. I heard the familiar sound of the water starting in the master bathroom shower. The sound was my starting gun. Chantal would be in there for at least 15 minutes. It was time. My movements were swift and silent, the skills of a lifetime on the force returning as if they had never left. I slipped out of my room and down the hall to the master suite. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and slid inside, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. The sound of the shower, a steady, percussive hiss, covered any small noise I might make. The first part of my plan was pure psychological warfare. I wasn't just presenting evidence. I was shattering her sense of control, her belief that she was the smartest person in the room. I walked over to the pristine white towel warmer. On it, a thick, fluffy bath towel was heating, waiting for the queen of the house to emerge from her shower. I took the towel off the rack. In its place, I took out the 8x10 glossy photograph I had printed from my burner phone using a 24-hour photo service in town the day before. It was a crystal-clear, close-up shot of the prescription bottle of olanzapine, its damning label perfectly legible. I used a piece of clear tape to affix it directly to the center of the large fog-free vanity mirror, right at her eye level. It was the first thing she would see when she stepped out of the shower. Then, for the final personal touch, I reached into the pocket of my robe. I pulled out the tube of expensive blood-red lipstick I had seen on her vanity during my earlier search. I uncapped it. On the mirror directly below the photograph, I scrawled two simple, powerful words in a large, messy script designed to look both angry and unhinged. The script of a woman on the edge. I know. I placed the lipstick on the counter, stepped back to admire my work, and then slipped out of the room as silently as I had entered. The first phase of the trap was set. The bait was laid. Now, I just had to wait for the target to emerge. I went to the kitchen and began the slow, deliberate process of making coffee. The aroma filled the sterile air, a comforting, normal scent in a world that was anything but. I had to create a scene of perfect domestic normalcy. My hands were steady as I measured the grounds. My breathing was even. On the outside, I was a calm, slightly frail old woman. On the inside, I was a hunter, waiting in the blind. I needed Robert out of the house. The confrontation had to be between me and Chantal, alone. I called him on the house intercom, my voice a little shaky, a little weak, all part of the performance. "Robert, honey," I said. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have a terrible craving for one of those almond croissants from that little French bakery you love. Would you be a dear and go pick some up for us?" There was a groggy pause. "Sure, Mom," he finally said, his voice thick with sleep. "I'll go in a few minutes." Perfect. He would be gone for at least half an hour. A few minutes later, the shower in the master bathroom stopped. I heard the slide of the glass door, The silence that followed was a taut, stretched thing. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Chantelle, wrapped in a towel, stepping out into the steam-filled room, her mind on her plan for the day, and then, the frozen moment of discovery. The sight of the photograph, the two red words screaming at her from the mirror. The silence was broken by a sharp, strangled cry of pure rage. Then the sound of something shattering, the lipstick tube being swept off the counter. I heard a string of vicious, ugly curses, words I had never heard her utter, her footsteps no longer the graceful glide of the lady of the house, but the heavy, furious stomps of a cornered animal, thundered down the hallway. She burst into the kitchen, her face a terrifying mask of fury. Her beautiful, composed features were twisted with hate. She was wearing a silk robe, hastily thrown on, her wet hair plastered to her skull. The perfect, charming angel was gone. In her place was a monster. "You meddling old fool," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous snarl. She stalked toward me, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What have you done?" I turned from the coffee maker, my expression one of carefully crafted, fearful confusion. This was the most important performance of my life. "Chantelle dear, what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You frightened me. Don't you play dumb with me," she spat, her eyes burning with a cold black fire. "The picture, the note. What is it you think you know?" I let my gaze drop to the floor, as if in shame. "I overheard you, Chantelle," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know about the medication. I know about the plan to have me committed today. And I know you plan to get rid of Robert." As I spoke, as I laid out my knowledge in the meekest voice I could muster, I subtly, almost imperceptibly, gave my secret voice command. My words were a shield, a cover for the real action. "It's a shame the weather isn't nicer," I said, my voice full of a non sequitur meant to sound like the ramblings of a confused mind. "The sun's gonna shine in my back door someday." In the corner of the kitchen, on the sleek smart hub mounted on the wall, a tiny, almost invisible blue light blinked once. The recording was live. My apparent weakness, my seeming confusion was the final catalyst Chantelle needed. Believing she was in a simple battle of wills, with a senile old woman who had stumbled onto a piece of a puzzle she couldn't possibly comprehend, she dropped her facade completely. All the pent-up rage, all the arrogance of a predator who believed she was about to close in for the kill, came pouring out. She laughed. It was a sound I will never forget. A cold, cruel, and utterly mirthless sound that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "You know?" she sneered, taking a step closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "You don't know anything. You're a confused old woman with a photograph. You think that pathetic little picture is proof of anything. You have nothing." She began to pace the kitchen, a caged tiger exulting in her own power, her every word a confession, her every admission captured in high-definition video and audio. "Let me tell you what's going to happen today, Essie. In about an hour, Dr. Miller from the psychiatric facility is going to arrive. I called him last night, after you wandered into the garden. I told him you'd become violent and paranoid, that you were making wild accusations. Your little stunt in my bathroom this morning, it's the perfect confirmation. You're the star witness for your own committal." My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my face a mask of terrified confusion. This was a new, horrifying twist. She was going to have me committed too. "And Robert," she continued, her eyes glittering with a sociopathic pride. "Oh my dear sweet, confused Robert, is a mess. I've spent months carefully cultivating this. His partners at his firm, his friends, his doctor, they all think he's on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. They've been getting worried calls from his loving, terrified wife for months. So when he has his breakdown today, when he starts screaming that I'm trying to poison him, a story you've no doubt planted in his head, everyone will believe me. They'll see a tragic textbook case of a man who has lost his mind." She stopped pacing and leaned in close, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And once you're gone and he's put away, safely in a facility where he can't manage his own affairs, his loving wife will have full power of attorney. And then, a tragic accident, an overdose of his prescribed medication, a terrible unforeseen complication. Everyone will mourn, everyone will pity the poor, beautiful widow, and Julian and I will have a very, very comfortable life on your son's fortune. It's the perfect plan, and you stupid old woman, you can't do a single thing to stop it." She had laid it all out, the entire monstrous diabolical plan delivered with the arrogant pride of a master criminal. She was so sure of her own brilliance, so convinced of my weakness, that she had just delivered a full signed confession. I let her finish. I let the last of her venomous words hang in the air. I looked at her, at the monster my son had married, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself a small grim smile. "You're right," I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady, all traces of fear and confusion gone. I didn't have proof. I paused, holding her gaze. But I do now. I looked past her to the smart hub on the wall. My voice was crisp, clear, and full of the authority I had not used in years. "Computer, end recording. Send file Chantel's confession to Robert Jones Jr. and to my emergency contact, Detective Aisha Washington, HPD. The smart hub, in its pleasant, automated female voice, replied instantly. "Action complete. Files sent." The color, the life, the arrogant certainty drained from Chantel's face. It was a slow, horrifying dawning, the look of a master chess player who has just realized they have been led into a trap and have been in checkmate for the last 5 moves. Her eyes darted from my face to the smart hub, the tiny blue light now off. She understood. Her perfect private confession had just been broadcast to the 2 people who could destroy her. At that exact moment, we heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Robert was home with the pastries. His phone, I knew, would be chiming with a notification for a new large video file. At the same moment, another sound, a distant but rapidly approaching siren, pierced the quiet suburban morning. My old friend and colleague Detective Washington was a woman who took emergency contacts very seriously. Chantel stood frozen for a single paralyzed second. Then her survival instinct took over. She whirled around and made a desperate, frantic run for the back door, for the sprawling manicured lawn that led to the woods beyond. The grieving widow, the triumphant heiress. It was all gone. All that was left was a common criminal, fleeing the scene of the crime, but there was nowhere left to run. The trap had been sprung, and the cage she had so carefully built for my son and me had just become her own. The aftermath was a maelstrom of flashing lights, sober-faced police officers, and the quiet, efficient dismantling of Chantel's world. She was apprehended before she even reached the back fence, a snarling, terrified animal deprived of her finery. Julian Blackwood was picked up an hour later at his downtown office, a slick, handsome man whose composure crumbled the moment he was shown the video of Chantel's confession. Robert sat at the kitchen table, a half-eaten almond croissant forgotten in his hand, his face a pale, ghostly mask of shock and horror. He had watched the video on his phone in the driveway, had seen and heard the woman he loved calmly and cheerfully detailing her plan to destroy and murder him. The chemical fog he had been living in for months was no match for the brutal, clarifying slap of the truth. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding of what I had done, of the danger I had faced for him, alone, in his own home. The months that followed were a painful, necessary period of healing and reconstruction. The legal case against Chantel and Julian was swift and decisive. The digital confession was irrefutable. They turned on each other immediately, their sociopathic partnership dissolving into a messy flurry of accusations and blame. They were both facing long prison sentences. The Wallace fortune, the prize for which they had been willing to kill, was secure. But the real work was with Robert. The detox from the medication was a brutal physical and psychological ordeal. He had to confront the reality that his mind, his greatest asset, had been methodically hijacked. He had to grieve for the woman he thought he had married, a woman who had never truly existed. It was a long, dark road, but he did not have to walk it alone. I didn't go back to Chicago. I sold my condo and moved to Houston permanently, into a small, sunny apartment, not far from Robert's house. The gilded cage, once a place of terror, was slowly being transformed back into a home. We worked together, Robert and I, to reclaim it. We changed the locks, reprogrammed the smart home system, and filled the silent, minimalist rooms with new furniture, warm colors, and the sound of jazz music. Our relationship was reforged in the fire of that terrible time. The condescending concern was gone, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He saw me not as an aging mother to be managed, but as the woman who had saved his life. And I saw him not as a victim but as a survivor, a man strong enough to face the ugliest of truths and begin the hard work of healing. One evening, several months later, we were sitting on his now peaceful patio, the scent of jasmine in the air. The smart home, once my weapon, was now just a convenience, playing a soft Miles Davis tune in the background. I had been teaching Robert how to play poker, an old trick from my detective days for learning how to read a person's tells, their unconscious signals of deception. He looked at the cards in his hand, then at me, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I think I'm finally starting to see it. The little flicker of the eye, the way someone holds their breath when they're bluffing." I smiled back, a genuine, warm smile. "It's all about observation, honey," I said. "It's about seeing what's really there, not just what you want to see." He nodded, placing his cards on the table. He had a winning hand. He looked at me, his eyes clear and full of a love and a gratitude that needed no words. He was healing. He was safe. And I, Esther Jones, the retired detective, the mother, the survivor, had closed the most important case of my life. The sun was finally shining in my back door, and it was here to stay.